What's going on, guys? Cultimush back at it with a video on a sensitive topic of frame rate and how much is enough frame rate to play your games at. Now, this is going to be more of a discussion video since this topic is so subjective. Everybody is going to have a different opinion on it, and in this video, I'm going to give you my opinion. And please, if everyone wants to, if you want to comment down below your thoughts, what kind of frame rates you like to play your games at, please do that. So frame rate is probably one of the biggest things people go into PC gaming for because a lot of console games run at 30 frames per second. A lot of games on consoles have a very hard time to even keep up with a 30 frame rate threshold. I just played The Witcher 3 on the PlayStation 4 a while back around the time it came out, and I was getting like 25 frames per second. That game was definitely not running at a consistent 30 frames per second during the whole game. And because I've been so accustomed to PC gaming, I was just like, man, I cannot play this game at, 25 frames per second. I'm okay with 30 frames per second for a lot of games, but it has to be a locked 30 frames per second. I know a lot of you guys, you can't even stand 30 frames anymore. A lot of you guys need 60, or some of you guys need even more than that. For me, it goes two ways. Okay, if I'm playing a multiplayer game like Counter-Strike or even League of Legends, I need 60 frames per second. There's no way I'm going to be playing a game like that at 30 frames. Especially a game like Counter-Strike, you get such a competitive edge having 60 frames per second, and most of the Counter-Strike pro players would say 60 frames per second isn't even enough. You need 120 frames, 140 frames, whatever. And that's not too big of a deal with a game like Counter-Strike because it's so easy to run. If you have a bare bones gaming PC rig, you can probably run that game at above 100 frames per second. But the thing about Counter-Strike is then you have to invest in a monitor that's 120 hertz because the majority of monitors are 60 hertz. The 144 hertz monitors are a tad bit more expensive, and most people don't get those. So I know a lot of people that are really hardcore into Counter-Strike, they'll get these really nice monitors, and that's literally the only game they play. They have a bare bones PC rig, they have this nice monitor, and they'll play Counter-Strike all the time, but they need to get that 140 hertz. I'm fine with 60 frames per second because I don't go that hard in those games. But a game like Counter-Strike, even League of Legends, I need to get at least 60 frames per second. But what I'm really wanting input from is single player games, a game like Witcher 3 or The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. The Witcher 3, my rig can run it at around 55 frames per second, 55 to 60 frames per second, and while that's really good, I do like playing The Witcher 3 at 60 frames per second. Don't get me wrong, I can definitely play that game at 30 frames per second. I know a lot of people would say, blasphemy, you cannot play a game like Witcher 3 at 30 frames per second. I don't know, I can, because when I was testing a graphics card like the R7 370 and I was getting around 35 frames per second, sometimes it would dip down to 30, I was having a fine experience playing that game. It's when it dips down to 25, 20, 15 that I'm just like, man, I can't play this game anymore. Another game is The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Well, that game's very easy to run as a vanilla game. If you download a lot of graphical mods on it, that game does get harder and harder to run, and I can play that game at 30 frames per second as well. But a lot of people might be like, oh my god, 30 frames per second, that's just blasphemy to a lot of people. And yes, a lot of people do get spoiled by PC gaming. That's actually kind of one of the problems with PC gaming is when you do get on the PC gaming train, and it's really not a problem, but you get really spoiled. You play these games at 1080p, 60 frames per second, and then when you go back and you try to play a game on the console, you're just like, man, this game looks terrible. But I digress. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I really want to know what you guys play your single player games at. I know most of you guys need to play games like Counter-Strike and League at 60 frames per second or even higher than that. But what I want to know is what kind of frame rates do you guys like to get when you're playing a game like The Witcher 3, Grand Theft Auto 5, Skyrim? For me, Grand Theft Auto 5 is a game where I do like having 60 frames per second at, especially while driving and things like that. I think that game looks a lot better at 60 frames per second. But the vast majority of single player titles like Skyrim, like The Witcher 3, I'm fine with playing those games at 30 frames per second. Keep in mind, I do have a rig that can run the game at 60 frames per second, but I've played these games at 30 FPS before, and I really didn't have too much of a trouble playing those games. Obviously, 60 FPS is nice, but in a lot of these more intensive single-player games like your Witcher 3s, like your Skyrims with mods, it gets really, really expensive if you want to run those games, with all the mods, high resolution, and get 60 frames per second. So let me know what kind of frame rates you guys like to play your games at, and as always, guys, leave your requests for future videos in the comment section down below, and as always, guys, have a great day, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace out.